These are rare pictures from the past that will change your perspective on the history you thought you knew. In 1919, the deck of the ship USS Agamemnon was crowded with cheering soldiers as they returned home from the battlefields of France at the end of the war. Over 4.5 million Americans served in the United States military war efforts. This American soldier is pictured sleeping on his ammunition in the Mason area during the Korean War. The war began in 1950 with the invasion of South Korea by North Korea and ended in 1953 in a ceasefire agreement. In 1862, a group of enslaved men, women, and children escaped from their masters' plantations to seek refuge behind Union lines. They became labeled as contrabands and enrolled to support the war instead of being returned. The deadliest hurricane and natural disaster in U.S. history was the Great Storm of 1900. The storm made landfall in Galveston, Texas, and this photo shows the aftermath. John F. Kennedy and his bride, Jacqueline, enjoyed dinner at their outdoor wedding celebration in 1953. Sadly, the marriage ended 10 years later with the assassination of JFK in 1963. In April 1920, Herbert McBride broke the world's motorcycle record for amateurs with a speed of 104.4 miles per hour. Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor took place on December 7, 1941, and marked a pivotal moment in World War II, drawing the United States into the conflict. This is an 1863 image of the battlefield at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where more than 50,000 Union and Confederate troops were killed, injured, or captured during the Civil War. The Vietnam War was a disaster for the U.S., nearly 60,000 deaths, intense division back home, and a painful legacy akin to a gaping wound in the national psyche. Locklear was a pioneering aviator, stuntman, and one of the first aerial stunt performers to gain fame for his death-defying feats. In this photo, he's performing a dangerous stunt on the wing of a Curtiss Jenny biplane in June 1920. This American sailor passionately kisses a nurse in Times Square, not out of love, but in celebration of the long-awaited victory over Japan in World War II. The people couldn't help but jubilate as the war finally ended with Japan's surrender. This picture was taken in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina in 1903. It is the first powered flight ever. Orville Wright is on the plane manning the controls, while the man standing is his brother Wilbur Wright. These people were the first audience to use 3D glasses in cinema in 1952 during the opening night screening of Buona Devil. The movie was a commercial success and is credited with sparking the 3D craze in the 1950s. The Cherokee Outlet opening of 1893 was one of the largest and most famous land rushes in U.S. history, where thousands of settlers rushed to claim land in what is now Oklahoma. The race was chaotic and led to the death of many. The Gunnery Camp was a pioneering summer camp founded by Frederick William Gunn in 1861. In Washington, Connecticut. Since then, summer camps have become a way for young boys and men to reconnect with their rural origins. The Great Fires of 1947 were a series of catastrophic forest fires that destroyed more than 20,000 acres of land, left thousands homeless, and killed 16 people. These are two Last Chance miners in Placer County, California. The Last Chance district is said to have been named by a starving miner who used his last bullet to kill a deer to eat. This is a view of Main Street, Salt Lake City in 1867. The city was founded in 1847 by Mormon pioneers from Illinois, fleeing persecution for their religious beliefs. Central Park, New York was designed in 1857 by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux. The design was the result of a competition held in 1857, which their entry, called the Greensward Plan, won. On August 4, 1965, New York Yankees legend Mickey Mantle famously tossed his batting helmet away in frustration during a game against the Chicago White Sox. Mantle reportedly went hitless in the game despite his efforts. Major Charity Adams addresses a contingent of the Women's Army Corps. The group was known as the 6888 and was the first group of black women to be deployed in Europe to sort mail for troops overseas. U.S. civil rights leader Martin Luther King waves to supporters from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial after delivering his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech on August 28, 1963 during the March on Washington. In 1957, Elizabeth Eckford, one of the first African-American students to attend Little Rock Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, was followed and threatened by an angry white mob. These are paleontologists in the lab with a rhinoceros skull and other specimens backstage at Chicago's Field Museum. Rose Dunn, famously known as Rose of Cimarron, gained fame at the age of 15 after she reportedly ran through a hail of bullets during a gunfight to give her outlaw boyfriend a rifle and ammunition to continue fighting. On December 16, 1773, a group of colonists dumped an estimated 342 chests of British tea into the Boston harbor as a protest against the Tea Act and British taxation policies. The event is now referred to as the Boston Tea Party. Miss Collier is a reporter for the Chicago Herald-Examiner. She decided to take a shot at iron bending because bricklaying was too full of ups and downs. In the 1890s, Coney Island in Brooklyn, New York was emerging as one of the most popular leisure and entertainment destinations in the United States. Steeplechase Park and Sea Lion Park opened in the 1890s, followed by Luna Park and Dreamland in the early 1900s. In 1919, the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution outlawed the production, transport, and sale of alcohol in the United States. This era became known as Prohibition and officially began in 1920. By refusing to give up her seat for a white man in a bus in 1955, Rosa Parks sparked a revolutionary movement, which saw the rise of a young Baptist minister named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Rosa Parks is seen in her Montgomery County mugshot after being arrested for refusing to give up her seat on a public bus to a white passenger. The Iolani Palace is the only royal palace in the United States. It was home to the Kingdom of Hawaii's monarchs until 1893. Unfortunately, it was overthrown by American-backed business interests. The California Gold Rush was a transformative event in American history, beginning in 1848 and peaking in the early 1850s. It drew hundreds of thousands of people from around the world to California in search of wealth. This is a photo of Ponder House not too long after the Battle of Atlanta in 1984. Confederate troops had occupied the house and it was shelled by Union forces. You can still see the bullet holes all over the building. Stephen F. Austin, also known as the Father of Texas, formed the Texas Rangers in 1823. They played a significant role in Texas history, evolving from a small militia force into one of the most storied law enforcement agencies in the U.S. After the huge herds of American bison that roamed the plains were almost wiped out, farmers plowed the natural grasses to plant wheat and other crops. This is a picture of farmers hauling water in Old Mexico. A woman places flowers at the cenotaph in memory of the dead of the Great War. About 16 million people died in the war worldwide, and another 20 million wounded. The annual May Festival of the Friends Select School in Washington, D.C. was a notable tradition held at the Friends Country Club. A crowd of men gather in New York's financial district, trying to get a glimpse of the aftermath of the Wall Street bombing. The bombing occurred on September 16, 1920, killing 38 people and injuring over 140 others. This photo, taken by photographer Dorothea Lange in 1936, became known as the Migrant Mother and is used to define America's Great Depression era. This is a San Francisco mail cart in 1895. In the 19th century, horse-drawn mail carts were commonly used to transport letters, packages, and other forms of mail over short to medium distances. This is not just a painting. It's an aerial view of the crowds on New York's Coney Island beach during the 4th of July circa 1920. 4th of July is a major national holiday in the U.S. to celebrate the nation's independence. This is a photo of the Havasupai people who lived in the Grand Canyon for about 800 years before the park's founding. The tribes lost many acres of land and were displaced from their homes. The Cliff House in San Francisco is a historic restaurant and landmark, perched on cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean near the Golden Gate. It is a significant building that has undergone several iterations in different periods of San Francisco's history. Here, the folks of St. Helena Island gather under the Spanish moss to celebrate American Independence Day in 1877. This is a common sight in the 1860s during the American Civil War. This is a Union field hospital with nurses from the Michigan Soldiers Relief Society gathered around the troops. This team of riders are from the Hayden Geological Survey of 1871. They explored and surveyed the land that would ultimately become Yellowstone National Park. This is a 1954 picture of Hollywood's hottest star, Marilyn Monroe. She was supposed to advertise a movie, but instead, this became one of the century's most famous images. Today, Venice Beach is known for its thronging crowds and eccentric street performers, but this early image shows a rather more laid-back scene. This is a dance hall at California's Venice Beach. The suffragist Alice Paul unfurls a banner from the balcony of the National Women's Party headquarters, showing a star for each state that has ratified the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. This is Charleston, South Carolina, in ruins during the Civil War. It was one of the first cities to secede from the Union and the site of the war's opening confrontation. An aerial view of the battleship USS Oklahoma, originally built in 1910. The Oklahoma was operated by the U.S. Navy until she was sunk in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii in December 1941. New York isn't the only city almost unrecognizable in 19th century photos. Today, Nashville is associated with lively honky-tonks and lofty skyscrapers. But here's an 1860s view from the capital showing low-rise homes. The Field Columbian Museum was originally established to hold artifacts from the 1893 World's Columbian Exhibition, the first to be hosted in Chicago. The only men to hang in Fort Smith, Arkansas for rape, these 5 members of the Rufus Buck Gang were executed on July 1, 1896. This is the largest mass execution for rape in U.S. history. This is what a vending machine looked like in the 1920s. It enabled people like this daytime worker to purchase goods after shops have closed. The beauty of America's Great Plains is on full display in this image from the early 1900s too. It captures a trio of indigenous Sioux people riding on horseback through the rural Midwest. Sunseekers revel on the sandy beach and in the waters of Lower Bay as the striking tower of Dreamland Theme Park rises in the background. This is Franklin D. Roosevelt at his summer home in Campobello with his 14-year-old daughter Anna. This photo was taken in August 1920. He became the President of the United States 13 years later. This is the Wawona tree, a soaring sequoia tree that had a tunnel cut through its base in 1881. Sadly, the weakened tree fell during a harsh winter in the 1960s. This photo captured the aftermath of the Wall Street bombing on September 16, 1920. Those responsible for the bombing attack were never identified, although it was investigated for years. This is the moment the Russian revolutionary leader Vladimir Lenin gave a speech to Red Army soldiers leaving for the front during the Polish-Soviet War. The people in this crowd are refugees at a bread distribution center at an Armenian refugee and orphan center. Frances Benjamin Johnson was one of America's earliest photographers. These children gathered around her to peer at her camera because photography was still quite novel at the time. This is an image of a Washington, D.C. marathon runner, Henry Elphinstone, in 1911. It was the first international marathon in Washington, D.C., and was won by Italian runner Dorando Petri. This image marks the moment Kentucky Governor Edwin P. Morrow signs the bill ratifying the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. In the 19th century, American bison were hunted to near extinction. The animals were killed for their prized skin, with their bodies left behind to decay. This is one of the many slave auction houses in Atlanta. The building hosted prospective buyers as they bid for enslaved people, who were presented as prized goods. These swimmers represented the United States of America at the 1920 Olympics in Antwerp. The Lady Ethelda Bleibtreu won 3 gold medals at the competition. After committing one of the last stagecoach robberies in the Old West in 1899, Pearl Hart gained fame nationwide when she was written up in Cosmopolitan. These 4 women are posing on the steps outside Atlanta University. It was the first historically black college or university in the southern United States in 1865. These people are standing outside the White House awaiting the results of the 1920 presidential election. The winner of the election was Warren G. Harding. On the 23rd of May, 1911, the city opened the doors to the New York Public Library, an elegant Beaux Arts-style building on Fifth Avenue. The Capitol building is one of America's most iconic landmarks. This image was taken after the erection of the Capitol's distinctive cast-iron dome in the 1850s to 1860s. America's cities shifted and swelled during the 19th century. This breathtaking shot from 1869 shows Yellowstone's mammoth hot springs prior to the park's founding. During a trial to win a contract with the U.S. Army, pilot Orville Wright and his passenger took off in a Wright Flyer from Fort Myer in Virginia. Unfortunately, the aircraft crashed. Wright survived, but his passenger did not. At the 1920 Summer Olympics in Antwerp, Belgium, Charles Paddock of the USA won the 100 meters with his famous flying finish. Taken in 1871, this photo shows the first boat on Yellowstone Lake. Today, Yellowstone National Park is a recreational hotbed, open for hiking, biking, and boating on Yellowstone Lake. A woman, Mary Pickford, takes a picture of her husband, Douglas Fairbanks Sr., who is executing a handstand on the roof of a building. After the war, many veterans poured into New York City hoping to find work. However, a recession in 1866 meant that employment was difficult to come by. This is a photo of Wall Street during the recession. This little boy is handing over a letter he wrote to be delivered to Santa Claus. Taken on December 4, 1920, after World War I, this photo represents hope for the nation. In the early 20th century, Atlantic City in New Jersey was also a hit with holidaymakers. This little girl and her lucky doll enjoy a ride on one of the city's famous rolling chairs. These giant toes belong to the Statue of Liberty, waiting to be assembled on her pedestal on Bedloe's Island. The statue was finally completed in April 1886. A horse and rider jumping between 2 soldiers during a horse jumping competition at Fort Myer, Virginia. Japanese women hold a demonstration to protest the low wages paid to female factory workers. At the time, female workers were paid a ridiculously low amount in wages compared to their male counterparts. After 5 years as a prisoner of the North Vietnamese, Robert L. Storm finally reunited with his family. He was among the hundreds of Americans to be released as part of the peace talks to end the Vietnam War. This is the winning team from the 3rd All-Alaska Sweepstakes, a dog sledding event held in the state between 1908 and 1917. Dog mushing is still a popular activity in Alaska today. The iconic moment when man first walked on the moon. Right after this moment, Neil Armstrong made the now famous statement, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." On the 6th of June 1944, nearly 5 years after the outbreak of war, the Allies launched their invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe with a meticulously planned set of amphibious landings and airborne missions in Normandy. The launching of Annie E. Morse, a steamship at the Virginia Shipbuilding Corporation in Alexandria, Virginia. It was a 19th century steamer that operated along the northeastern coast of the United States. Nevada is defined by the gold rush, and abandoned ghost towns still litter the state today. One city that grew up around the deposits was Goldfield, which is pictured here at the turn of the century. A human bird aeroplane displayed at an aero show in July 1920. Aero shows became a popular form of entertainment and a way to showcase advancement in aviation technology after World War I. This dog handler is reading a message brought by his messenger dog. During World War I, these dogs were specifically trained for this purpose. The Republican presidential candidate Warren G. Harding gave a speech from his front porch on August 16, 1920. Harding went on to win the 1920 election and became America's 29th president. This McDuffie suit was an early attempt at creating a diving suit capable of deep-sea exploration. It was constructed primarily of aluminum and weighed 550 pounds. It was extremely heavy and resistant to the pressures of deep water. The Bloody Sunday occurred on March 7, 1965, during the Selma to Montgomery marches in Alabama. This photo captured the brutal moment Alabama state troopers and local law enforcement attacked the civil rights demonstrators. In this 1915 photo, suffragist Elizabeth Selden White Rogers is seen promoting women's right to vote on a mobile platform in the Big Apple. Sergeant Stubby was a heroic dog who served during World War I and is one of the most famous war dogs in history. His role in World War I showed how animals played a significant part in warfare. Popularly known as the March of the Mill Children, in 1903, Mary Harris Jones led a march to protest against the exploitation of child labor in textile mills and factories. The Young Pioneers, also known as the Pioneer Organization, was a Soviet youth organization that functioned similarly to the Boy Scouts. They're wearing gas masks in this photo as a form of preparedness against all attacks, including gas. Boston's Tremont Street subway was the first subway tunnel in North America in 1897. The subway line ran from an entrance at the Boston Public Garden and Haymarket Square. In the late 19th century, New York City was a magnet for the world's immigrants. This place is known as Bandits' Roost, Mulberry Street, and this is a Lower East Side gang lurking in the alleys. Bolaji Badeo, a 22-year-old Nigerian, starred as the xenomorph in Ridley Scott's 1979 sci-fi classic Alien and terrified the audience. He was a perfect fit for the role due to his extra long legs. On June 16, 1976, several thousand students set out to protest the introduction of mandatory Afrikaans language instruction in their township schools. The peaceful protest soon turned into a violent uprising claiming the lives of hundreds. The German photojournalist Erich Solomon candidly shot exhausted foreign ministers after a long day of negotiations. It was the first time the public could look through the doors of power and see world leaders with their guards down. This photo was shot a few weeks before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. You can see the division in the bus as the black people are forced to sit at the back, while the whites stay in front. Hattie Caraway was the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate. She succeeded her husband as an Arkansas senator, and then she won re-election with more votes than her 6 male opponents combined. This Red Army soldier raised a massive Soviet flag in the heart of the Nazis' homeland. The photo was taken on May 2, 1945, just 2 days after Adolf Hitler unalived himself. Kennedy visited West Berlin in June 1963 and was greeted by ecstatic crowds, which cheered wildly and showered his motorcade with flowers and confetti. Vintage photo of a young Arnold Schwarzenegger in his physical prime between 1960 and 1980. He won several titles from Mr. Universe and Mr. Olympia during his bodybuilding years. This test pilot, George Aird, was suddenly ejected from his aircraft mid-flight during a test flight. Although he sustained multiple fractures, fortunately, he survived. An unauthorized photo of Joseph Stalin inside the Kremlin shows the moment he was informed that the German armies had advanced in Kiev. He was the leader of the Soviet Union, and this picture was right after he was betrayed by Hitler. A photo of Adolf Hitler at a Nazi Party rally in 1934. The rally was officially called the Rally of Unity and Strength. This happened just 5 years before the dreadful World War II began. A rare photo of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. She was the First Lady and wife to President John F. Kennedy before his assassination in 1963. 5 years after her husband's death, she married Aristotle Onassis, one of the wealthiest men in the world at the time. At a time when mainstream American culture had little room for homosexuality, this photograph, titled Brian Ridley and Lyle Heater, was taken in 1979 as a larger body of work increasing visibility for the LGBTQ+ community. The first U.S. Women's Olympic Marathon took place at the 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, marking a historic moment in both Olympic and women's sports history. It was the first time that a women's marathon was included in the Olympic Games. In 1942, the U.S. military ordered a total blackout of Los Angeles and fired 1,400 anti-aircraft artillery shells and several .50 caliber machine guns at something in the sky. The event is now referred to as the Battle of Los Angeles. In 1950, Coca-Cola decided to start a big marketing campaign targeting the drink to the people of France. As seen in the picture, the French initially didn't find the taste of Coke to be that great. Joseph Kuldeka, a young Moravian-born engineer, took this photo in 1968, showing the moment of the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. The wristwatch on his hand shows the exact time of the invasion. The quiet intimacy displayed by the couple in this photo created a new trend and revolution in 1963 Paris. Young men began to get close to young women and be intimate while dancing, which was not allowed previously. This is a 1934 photo of the Loch Ness Monster. The monster is a legendary creature said to inhabit Loch Ness, a large freshwater lake in the Scottish Highlands. The terrified young boy with his hands raised at the center of this image was one of nearly 500,000 Jews packed into the Warsaw Ghetto, a neighborhood transformed by the Nazis into a walled compound of grinding starvation and death. On July 22, 1975, this woman and a child jumped out of the 5th floor of a building to escape from the fire, which had broken out in the house. The woman did not survive the fall, but her body cushioned the blow for the little girl, allowing her to survive. Catherine Switzer became the first woman to officially run the Boston Marathon, despite being attacked by the race director, who tried to physically pull her out of the race because she was a woman. In the summer of 1963, Birmingham was boiling over as Black residents and their allies in the civil rights movement repeatedly clashed with a white power structure intent on maintaining segregation and willing to do whatever that took. This is the most successful real estate image ever taken. It perfected the art of aspirational staging, turning a house into the embodiment of the good life, of stardusted Hollywood, of California as the promised land. A mercy dog, also known as an ambulance dog or Red Cross dog, was a dog that served in a paramedical role in the military during World War I. They were often sent out after large battles, where they would seek out wounded soldiers with their first aid supplies. The R-33 was part of a series of rigid airships designed by the British Royal Navy in the years following World War I. It served as a reconnaissance aircraft, conducting patrols and missions. The Great Patriotic War is the term used in Russia and some other former Soviet states to refer to the Eastern Front of World War II, specifically the conflict between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany from June 22, 1941 to May 9, 1945. Known as America's first female serial killer, Eileen Wuornos carried out a string of notorious and brutal murders along the dark highways of Florida in late 1989 and 1990. This blind woman was an immigrant who was said to be selling newspapers on the street at the time this photo was taken. The 1918 Spanish flu pandemic was one of the deadliest pandemics in history. It spread rapidly around the world in 3 waves between 1918 and 1919, affecting approximately 1/3 of the global population and resulting in an estimated 50 million deaths. On July 24, 1950, German and American technology was combined to launch the first 2-stage rocket from the United States. It was launched from Cape Canaveral, a place on the Atlantic coast of Central Florida. This photo of the Beatles captures the sheer joy, happiness, and optimism that would be embraced as Beatlemania, and that helped lift America's morale just 11 weeks after John F. Kennedy's assassination. These people are having a picnic at the California Alligator Farm in Los Angeles. From 1907 to 1953, the farm served as a wildlife park, allowing visitors to freely interact with trained alligators. A rare picture of John Fitzgerald Kennedy and Jacqueline Lee Bouvier before they got married and became American royalty. Little did they know that an assassination would separate them in a few years. During the 1968 Olympics, gold medalists Tommy Smith and John Carlos bowed their heads and raised their fists to pass a message without saying a word. Before we salute America, America must treat blacks as equals. This 1855 photograph by Roger Fenton is popularly known as the Valley of the Shadow of Death. The image captured the battlefield of the Crimean War, fought between the Russian Empire and an alliance of the Ottoman Empire. Dr. Ernest Sirianni was a physician who single-handedly tended to a community of 2,000 souls during the Second World War. He tended to infants, delivered injections in the backseat of cars, developed his own X-rays, and many more. These are Soviet peasants listening to the radio for the first time. While the photo looks like they had a terrified look on their faces, it was more of a shock as they had never seen or heard from a radio. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, famously known as Mahatma Gandhi, was a key leader in India's struggle for independence from British colonial rule. Although he was imprisoned several times throughout his life, he eventually saw the independence of India in 1947. Salvador Allende was the first democratically elected Marxist head of state, and he assumed the presidency of Chile in 1970 with a mandate to transform the country. This was the last photo taken of him hours before his death during a coup orchestrated by a general he appointed. 3 days after an atomic bomb nicknamed Little Boy obliterated Hiroshima, Japan, U.S. forces dropped an even more powerful weapon dubbed Fat Man on Nagasaki. During the 1936 Games in Berlin, Owens placed first in the 100 meters, 200 meters, 4x100 meter relay, and the long jump. Ironically, due to racism and segregation, he was not allowed to enter through the front of a prominent New York hotel to attend his own tribute and had to take a service entrance. A young woman does the limbo dance at a Los Angeles nightclub, circa 1964. The limbo dance is a traditional Caribbean dance where dancers attempt to pass under a horizontal bar without touching it, while bending backward in a limbo position. This is Antietam, the blood-churning battle in Sharpsburg, Maryland, where more Americans died in a single day than before. The Battle of Antietam was one of the most significant and bloodiest battles of the American Civil War. These are participants in the beautiful leg contest at Palisades Amusement Park. The contestants had to wear pillowcases over their heads, so the judges could only see their legs. This is the very first known photograph of the White House ever. It was taken in January 1846 by a Welsh immigrant named John Plum, Jr., who was one of the country's first prominent professional photographers. Undaunted by those who believed it couldn't be found, Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb in November 1922. In this photo, he talks with his English benefactor, the Earl of Carnarvon, who almost lost faith in him after years of unyielding research. Cuban revolutionary Che Guevara became the cultural shorthand for rebellion and one of the most recognizable and reproduced images of all time. Guevara became a martyr after he was killed leading a guerrilla movement in Bolivia. Meet Sally Ride, the first American woman to travel into space. She made history on June 18, 1983, when she flew aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger on the STS-7 mission. Bonnie Taberzi was the first woman to be hired as a pilot by a major U.S. airline in 1973. She said in an interview that when she first started, a uniform for women didn't even exist. This is a terrifying image of the hand of Anna Bertha Röntgen. She was the wife of Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen, the German physicist who discovered X-rays. This picture was the very first X-ray photograph taken. During the assassination of John F. Kennedy, a woman was observed who might have photographed the events that occurred when the president was shot. However, she has never been identified and none of the pictures she took ever surfaced. This photograph captures two of the most iconic leaders of the Cuban Revolution during a rare moment of leisure. On the left of the photo is Fidel Castro, the Prime Minister of Cuba, and his close ally on the right is Che Guevara, an Argentine Marxist revolutionary. In 1945, a group of Soviet schoolchildren presented a U.S. ambassador with a carved U.S. seal as a gesture of friendship. It hung in his office for 7 years before discovering it contained a listening device. The shoe shiner working on Paris's Boulevard du Temple one spring day in 1839 had no idea he would make history. This groundbreaking image is the first known instance of human beings captured in a photograph. This photograph is considered one of the most famous and controversial war images in history. It depicts a soldier seemingly captured in the moment of being shot and falling to the ground. The little girl manning a gargantuan cotton spinning machine was one of the many small children at work in that factory. This was during the Industrial Revolution, when child labor was a trend in factories, mills, and other industries. David Kirby died surrounded by his family, and this photograph did more than just capture the heartbreaking moment. It humanized AIDS, the disease that killed Kirby, at a time when it was ravaging victims largely out of public view. In 1907, beachgoers in Sydney, Australia held a protest against the strict regulations imposed by the Sydney City Council regarding the compulsory swimsuits for men and women. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic departed from Southampton, England, on its maiden voyage. The ship made 2 additional stops before heading across the Atlantic, where it tragically sank after hitting an iceberg. This Italian mom wearing a funeral mask is known as a Capuchin monk. The Capuchin monks are a branch of the Franciscan order within the Roman Catholic Church, known for their austerity, humility, and simplicity. The image captured by H.S. Wong, a photographer for Hearst Metrotone News, is particularly harrowing. A Chinese baby is seen crying on the train tracks while its mother lies deceased nearby. To many white Americans in the 1930s, black people were little more than domestics or sharecroppers. They were ignored, invisible, forgotten. However, this photo of this interracial couple challenged popular perceptions about race and class, inspiring generations of African Americans yearning for a piece of the American dream. Photo of stunning Susan Peters riding her Monarch bicycle along the Pacific Palisades at Santa Monica, 1942. Susan Peters was an Oscar-nominated young actress, being groomed for stardom at MGM when she was shot in a hunting accident and left paralyzed from the waist down. If you enjoyed these pictures, like and subscribe to our channel for more, as we'll bring you more fascinating pictures from the forgotten past.